Well, good morning. I am Kat Britton. I am the associate pastor here at Parkway UMC, and I am so glad to be preaching this morning on Graduation Sunday. I hang out with the youth. I have for many years now. I was talking to Matt Watson before the first service, and I realized that I have known at least Clay and Aiden, I think, for at least 14 years, which is quite wild. And then Philip is my brother, so I have known him for 17 years. But okay, this morning we are walking through this sermon series called Identity. Who are you? And when I started approaching on what would I preach about this morning, what is God calling me to talk about, I looked at what is my identity through the years? Who am I? Who is Kat? So I laid it out pretty simple. From the age of 0 to 3, I was a baby. I was a toddler. I was a daughter. I was a sister. I was baptized. From 3 to 10, I was a child. I was in elementary school. I was a figure skater. From 11 to 12, I was a preteen. Gross. Sorry, parents. I was a reader, a math lover, a church goer. From 13 to 18, I was a teenager, a basketball player, a theater geek, a math nerd, and I was a Christian. I had claimed it for myself within those years through confirmation. Between 19 and 21, I was a college student, starting off with engineering, later to management. I was a girlfriend. I was responsible. I was a Christian. From 22 to 25, I was a spouse. I was a pastor. I was organized. I was a Christian. From 26 to 27, now, I am a mom. I am a planner. I am a Christian. I want you to close your eyes and think back at your identity markers throughout your life. You don't have to do it from birth to now like I did, but what are the big moments for you where your identity may have shifted? Our scripture today comes from the letter to the Colossians, chapter 1, verses 9 through 14. It says, "For this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, and giving joyful thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins." So why this scripture this morning? Well, it's pretty easy. You see, for the past at least 10-ish years, this is the scripture that we have had play at the end of the slideshow for Graduation Sunday always. That translation says in verse 10, "May the way you live always honor and please the Lord, and your lives produce every kind of good fruit. All the while, you will grow as you learn to know God better and better." It's a wonderful scripture as we send these graduates off away from high school and into where they figure out where they fit into society. But we're going to look at a particular point of this scripture today, and I'm going to reread it, so hang with me. It says, "We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience." In this scripture, there's a couple things here. One is the repetition of all and every. That's actually the same Greek word. And we know as we come to read the Bible, when an author repeats one specific word that many times in scripture, it is often something that we should pay attention to. It's often something that the author is trying to get across to us. And we see here this emphasis on all and every is calling us to recognize the big picture of God's work. That all of these things and every one of these things is connected to our relationship with Christ and how our identity is formed and wrapped up in it. Another thing in the scripture that I want to point out is its language using continually. You may live a life growing in the knowledge so that you may. We have this future tense mixed with present tense that the author here is trying to get the Colossians to understand that this is not a one and done. This is not a claiming to be Christian and you know all the things and God is just like, zap, you're good to go. You know all about me. We don't need to do anything else. This is an ever-growing relationship with Christ. We are constantly learning more and gaining more from our relationship and our wisdom. So you see, our identity is not fully the same at one moment in our life, flash forward to 5 years. We don't have the same knowledge that we did 5 years ago, but we still have this same purpose. Graduates, this is why this scripture is chosen. You see, you have been equipped to handle school and handle middle school and handle high school, and you are who you are, whether you played a sport or you were in NHS or you had this job in your hometown or you did these things or you were good at this good class. This is a life moment change for you where some of those things that were true in high school may not be true going into adulthood. But one thing remains the same, and it is your faith. That you are ever growing in your relationship with Christ and you will only be better for it. That you will gain more wisdom and knowledge and you will produce good fruit as you grow in this faith and this relationship. Our congregation, I asked you to take a moment and think back to all the identity names you have had in the past. And I know some of you may have experienced more than I have. You may identify as an experienced person in your job, or in different levels of the job or at different jobs completely. You may be retired. You may be an empty nester. You may be a grandparent. All of these things you were ever growing in. If you notice, when I listed out my ages at the beginning of my message, I ended with Christian on a lot of them because it stayed the same. Our identity as Christians must stay the same. For it is in all and in every of these things that are all pointing back to God. Ever-growing is for the better. I had a big change, graduates, right after I went to college. I enrolled at the University of Houston as a mechanical engineering major and loved every second of it. I was a huge lover of physics and calculus and engineering math. It was great. And then my second spring semester, I was in an elevator accident that tore my bicep, and I got nerve damage in my neck, resulting in me to not even be able to lift a 1-pound weight. That catapulted my life to change, but for the better. Because I went back to school after being very involved at Parkway UMC and the children's and student ministry, receiving a call to be in the church full-time. I didn't know what it looked like quite yet, but I knew that changing my major from mechanical engineering may be helpful. While my mechanical engineering major is certainly helpful at UMArmy and building wheelchair ramps, I figured that a business management degree with an HR specialty may be more helpful in working inside of a church. For I'm currently in seminary and graduating this August, and I have learned all sorts of theological things and biblical studies and evangelism and worship, but not one class of accounting and not one class of HR management. That one moment in my life catapulted a huge change. And I recognized that while I planned on being a Christian mechanical engineer, I could also be a pastor. That one Christian identity stayed the same. Now, I'm not telling you that your spring semester you're going to be in an elevator accident and you're going to become a pastor. I hope the first part doesn't happen to you. We'll see about the second. But something will happen. And during those moments, which you have to stay true to, is your faith. Because that is what you will ultimately grow in. Another huge moment that happened these last 2 weeks was the church being a witness to this. A witness to the fact that things can change for the better. That we don't know everything that we did 5 years ago. That we don't know everything that we did 30 years ago. You see, I know that Justin has mentioned it about doing a debrief after church to talk about what General Conference talked about these last 2 weeks. General Conference is the body of the world church that meets every 4 years to discuss the doctrine and the business of the church and our beliefs and how we do ministry as a worldwide church. Justin and I and our lay delegates to our annual conference locally get to elect delegates from our area to go there. And we had many delegates from the Texas Annual Conference go there this week. And they got into it. They got into the discipline. They got into our social principles. And they made changes. And it's not because everything was bad. It was because they have gained more knowledge. They understand, they have grown, they have understood more from the scriptures. They have grown in this wisdom in order to enable them to bear good fruit. If you have questions about the General Conference, I highly recommend that you attend the talk with Justin after the service. Lastly, this is not just a responsibility on our shoulders. It is also a gift. You see, the scripture ends with, giving joyful thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. If you read a little bit further into verse 16, it says, for in him, Christ, all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, invisible and visible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. Through him and for him. It is a gift that we have been created. It is a gift that we get to be created to live out Christ's message. So when you look at who you are outside of these walls, when you think of those identity markers and words that I urged you to do at the beginning of the service, remember that all of those things are founded in who you are as a Christian. And they will change because we are ever growing and should be. We should be reaching out into our relationship with Christ and growing deeper. So how is your identity through him? How are you molded from your ever-growing relationship with Christ? How is your identity for Christ? How are you living it out now?